So look, I was able to get up to 98 miles an hour in my professional baseball career. And it wasn't because I was crazy talented or because I had a 6'5" frame. In fact, I was a 16-year-old throwing 78 miles an hour. But 3 years later, I hit 98 miles an hour. And by throwing in the upper 90s, I was able to get to the Division I and professional level, which I wouldn't have been able to do if I was only topping out at 90 miles an hour. So if you're looking to get to the mid 90s and beyond, then this short video is for you. Because I'm gonna give you the step-by-step process of how I was able to throw 98 miles an hour and how I'd do it if I'd start all over again in just the next 30 minutes. By the way, I'm Josh Guest and I co-founded the Pitcher Lab. I played 7 years of professional baseball where I got up to 98 miles an hour, and now I'm training to throw 100 miles an hour, so I think about this stuff all day. Now, if you need help with gaining pitching velocity, first link in the description. You can book a call with us and we'll see if it's the right fit for you. Let's dive in. So it's split up into two parts. There's the training aspect and the mechanics aspect, okay? And so the training aspect is basically building up your body so that it's capable of producing the force needed to throw, in this case, 98 miles an hour, okay? And obviously the mechanics part is actually piecing everything together and actually being able to express that force on the mound into the back of the baseball to throw 98 miles an hour, okay? And so every single training program, everyone has different philosophies, they do different things, but it all comes down to this. There's no other way you can train to throw harder. Arguably, there's the mental aspect where you're training the mind to try to throw harder, but that's a completely separate video and something that's intangible. So I want to talk more about the training, developing the body, and also the mechanics, which is actually transferring the frame that you built onto the mound and to the back of the ball. And so we've got training and mechanics is definitely king. That's why you see guys who are skinny and weak who still can throw pretty hard because they're able to sequence so well and transfer the energy into the back of the ball extremely efficiently. But the training side and actually building out your frame is extremely important, because if you don't have a good frame that can actually produce force, then you're fighting an uphill battle, especially if you're trying to throw 98 into the upper 90s. You can probably get to 90, low 90s without having a really good frame, but at these elite levels of the upper 90s, mid 90s, upper 90s, and 100, then you need a good frame, a big, strong, powerful frame that can produce that force, okay? And so before we get into mechanics, which is king, I'm gonna talk about the training and developing the frame needed to throw 98 miles an hour and how I did it. So the first thing that I did, and something that I would recommend for most players, is to build a really good strength base, okay? And so from a younger age, I did bodyweight stuff. And then when I was about 15, 16, I started to lift. And from 16 to about 17 was all about building a really solid foundation and a strength base. And what I mean by strength base pretty much just means that I'm strong enough to throw in the mid 90s and beyond. And you're probably confused, like, how can you just be strong enough to throw in the mid 90s and beyond? Like, can't you just keep getting stronger, and like the stronger you get, the better it is? Well, that's what you call strength base. And in throwing, there's a point of diminishing returns to where if you keep getting stronger, then you don't get as much benefit. And so if you look at this graph, it's pretty much like this, okay? And so when you first start to lift and you gain strength, yes, your velo is gonna start to go up because you're getting stronger, right? Your muscles are getting stronger, your tendons, even your bones are getting stronger, right? And that is gonna help in the earlier stages. But as you keep getting stronger and stronger and stronger, there's a point where it doesn't help you that much more. And this point is something that people argue about. There's no scientific numbers on it. But what I've seen with our athletes, with myself, and all of the guys that I've trained is having metrics, something around this. So it would be a 2 times body weight deadlift. This one I usually like, trap bar deadlift, because I don't really like straight bar deadlift as much. I do like the trap bar, even though it's kind of cheating. But if you're able to do 2 times or even 2.5 times your body weight with the deadlift, then that's a pretty good strength base. Now the next one is 1.5 to 2 times your body weight with the squat. And ideally this is the front squat, but if you do back squat, then I would want it a little bit closer to the 2 times body weight. And the last ones aren't as important, but if you can bench your body weight, right, and do like 10 full chin-ups, then you've got a pretty good strength base, okay? The caveat to this is your body weight. I like to see a body weight of at least 2.5 times your height in inches, okay? And this is the very minimum, okay? And so if you have this body weight, okay, and that kind of means that you're pretty, filled out. You're not like jacked or anything like that, but you've got a decent enough frame, especially if you're a little bit older, right? If you're 14, 15, a little bit younger, then obviously you have a lot of room and time to fill out. But if you're a guy watching this who's a little bit more older, higher high school or college or even professional, then this is kind of what you want to shoot for. And once you hit this, then you can start to look at your strength base, right? And so for me, when I was throwing 98 miles an hour, I'm 6'1", around 200 pounds. And so for me, I was easily deadlifting over 400. I was actually doing more like 600 pounds. But I don't think that's necessary. I don't think that's completely necessary to throw really, really hard. Squatting, again, I was pushing 500, 550 pounds. So I cleared these very, very easily. The one thing that I will say is that I was extremely strong. I was pushing a lot of weight, but then that eventually led to injury. And so that comes back to the diminishing returns, where if you keep trying to push this, right, and push it, strength, you're not going to get that much benefit from a velo standpoint. Your injury risk skyrockets, okay? And so this is one of the things that I would do if I had started over, was not to push lifting as hard. Like I would just go into the gym and sometimes I just felt good, and so I'll just 1 rep max and try to hit a PR on my back squat or deadlift, right? Anytime I felt good, all right, I'm just gonna go 1 rep max as hard as I could. In reality, what I should have done, and this is my next point, right, is I had already built a good solid foundation, a strength base. Now, how do you continue to progress from there? Well, that's where rate of force development comes in, okay? So how do you keep pushing this so that it goes like this and you don't get stuck in the diminishing returns curve? Well, this is rate of force development. And basically what rate of force development is how quickly you're able to produce force, right? And it's just so important in the pitching delivery, more important than strength, because the pitching delivery happens in seconds, right? And so you have to be able to produce force in those tiny windows to be able to throw hard. So you might have seen this diagram before, but let's just say that this is strength, right? However much strength you have. And let's just say you can squat 400 pounds, okay? And then this is rate of force development. How much of this strength that you can tap into in the pitching delivery, right? Because it's milliseconds. You can't tap into all of it at once. You don't have 6 seconds to squat, right, in the pitching delivery. You have milliseconds. And so the game becomes, how much of this can you tap into in the pitching delivery? Okay, and so instead of continuing to increase this, right, which is strength, I would rather you just continue to increase this and tap into more of the strength that you already have if you have a good strength base. And this is what's going to help you produce even more force on the mound, okay? The most elite athletes can tap into 80 to 90% of their force potential. And this, we're talking about like elite sprinters, Olympic athletes, stuff like that, okay? And so obviously we don't have to strive to that level, but we do want to increase this as much as possible because this is what's usable on the mound. And there's a study that I really like, and it was with 2 discus throwers, right? They both had the same 1 rep max. So let's just say each guy could squat 500 pounds. Now, athlete 1 would squat that 500 pounds, and it took him 5 seconds to get up, okay? It was like 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3, 4, 5, and then he got up. And the next athlete, it still was 1 rep max, but it only took him 1 second to get up. So it was 1 Mississippi, okay? And what they found was the guy who got up to 1 rep max much quicker had much better rate of force development, right? Because he could tap into his max force much, much quicker than the other athlete. Now, which athlete do you think threw the discus further? Well, it was athlete B, because he was able to tap into a lot of his force a lot quicker. right? Athlete A couldn't really tap into it with the discus throw because it took too long for him to get there, all right? And so that's why rate of force development is so, so important. Now, the level above rate of force development, when you're at an elite level, you're like mid 90s and you're trying to get to 98 or 100, is to train the ATP-CP system, right? And basically what this is the energy system that fuels peak power output, okay? It's the energy system. And basically, the central nervous system, we all have the central nervous system that activates the ATP-CP system when we do explosive movements, okay? And so this is pretty much your ability to go from a very relaxed, right, to a max intent state as quickly as possible, okay? And so that's what we're training. And I'll go into a little bit more about how we actually train each of these attributes, but I wanted to explain the 3 levels of the strength base, okay? And then we have rate of force development, and then we have the ATP-CP and more speed, right? Max intent speed type training. And this is how you progress your training as you get to the higher levels. Now, I made individual videos on each of those, strength, rate of force development, and ATP-CP training, but I'll give you a summary right here of how you actually train each of these, okay? So for strength, the first thing is progressive overload. Okay, you've probably heard this before. It's a very basic term, but it's one of the best ways to build strength and get to your strength base quicker, right? And basically what progressive overload means is that you're adding weight to the bar each week or each time you lift. And so, for example, you do 135 pounds of a squat for 5 reps. And then next week, you do 140 for 5 reps. And then the next, you try to do 145 for 5 reps. And you repeat. And what usually happens is you will stall, right? You're gonna keep progressively overloading, and then you stall, right? You try to do 150 for 5 reps, but then you're not able to do it, and so you take a little bit of a deload, right? So you might deload a little bit and go down to 140, and then work yourself back up, and then it kind of looks like this, okay? And then after months of consistent training, for me, I built a strength base over about 4 years. I started when I was 13, and all the way up to about 17, this was all I focused on, was progressive overload. And you don't have to start when you're 13, right? When I was 13, I was doing more bodyweight stuff. You can start a lot later. When you're 16, 17, 18, it's a lot easier to build strength base because you probably already know exactly what to do. And so that's pretty much what I did, was progressive overload to build a strength base. Okay, so the next one is rate of force development. And this becomes a little bit more tricky. There are a bunch of ways where you can train this, but the 3 biggest ways I love to train rate of force development is first, VBT type training. So you've probably seen it before where, you're doing a lift or you've seen someone do it, and there's like a string attached to the bar, right? And it's connected to a machine. And basically what this machine is doing is measuring how fast that string is going or how fast that bar is going. It measures it in meters per second. And so if you do a squat, it might be like a 1.3. So it's a 1.3 meters per second. That's how quickly the bar is going. And so if you use the same weight, let's just say you're using 135 pounds, right? And then you squat up, you get a 1.2, all right? And then the next week you do the same thing, same weight, and then you get 1.3. Well, then your rate of force development increased because you're moving the same weight faster, right? That's kind of what the VBT type training is. It's also called dynamic effort training, and this was popularized by Louis Simmons and Westside Barbell, which is the best powerlifting gym in the whole world, right? And they incorporate a lot of this because they recognize that even for powerlifting, rate of force development and speed is super, super important. Okay, and so that's the first one, VBT type training, I love for rate of force development. The next one is overcoming ISOs. This is something that I love. This is something that I started to talk about a lot in the baseball community. Basically what this is you're pushing or pulling against something that is immovable, right? For as hard as you can for a couple seconds, and then you relax. All right, and there was a study with overcoming ISOs to where there were 2 groups, right? One did nothing. One group just performed vertical jumps, right? And they didn't do any type of training. The other group, right, did the vertical jumps, but also did overcoming isos. Now, they did this for about 8 weeks and then they came back and saw which one jumped higher. And obviously the one who did the overcoming isos jumped higher, but the interesting thing was that none of their muscles had grown. They didn't have any physical changes. The one thing that did improve was rate of force development, because overcoming isos help how well the brain signals to the muscles to activate. Okay, and so when you're pulling or pushing against an immovable object as hard as you can, right, your brain is telling the muscles to activate, and when it doesn't move, it's trying to send more resources to actually accomplish the task, which is to try to move that weight, right? Or to try to move against that immovable object. For that, again, I have a video on this, but overcoming isos is one of the best ways to train rate of force development. And the third way I love to train rate of force development is plyometrics, okay? And so for plyometrics, very self-explanatory. Jumps, right? Box jumps, vertical jumps, broad jumps, all of that stuff is really, really good. Learning how to explode, right? And so those are the three ones: VBT type training, overcoming isos, and plyometrics. And basically what I did when I had done progressive overload, I had built a good strength base. I was at about 90, right? And so I incorporated and hammered VBT type training, plyometrics. I hadn't done overcoming isos at that time. I didn't know about them, but this is something I would have definitely incorporated into my training. And so I hammered that, and that's what actually helped me get to about 95 miles an hour, okay? Now the last one you want to train is the ATP-CP system, and this is something that I actually didn't train, and so this was something that I wish I would have done, right, looking back, and how I would throw 98 miles an hour if I could start over. And so when I was throwing 95 here, a lot of my gains came from actually mechanics and making a couple adjustments there. But I feel like this would have really helped and pushed me to that next level. And you never know, I could have been throwing 100 back then if I had incorporated this. And so basically what this is I like to think about it like going from a relaxed state to a max effort state really, really quickly, right? And I also like to think about it as being able to move your body extremely well, okay? And so a couple ways to train this is obviously sprints. Sprints is the highest neurological output activity a human can do, okay? And so for me right now, when I'm training, every second day I'm doing max effort sprints, right? I do about 10 of them, different variations, and that's the main lift of the day for me, because that is what's gonna help me develop this ATP-CP system and get me from being able to activate really, really quickly, right, from a relaxed position. Now, this is something that I started to dive into when I was researching Japanese players, right? A lot of these Japanese players throw gas in the MPB. But the one caveat is that they don't lift. They don't do any of this stuff. And so I was like, okay, so how do they actually throw hard? Well, a lot of it came down to the ATP-CP system and how well and efficiently they're able to activate this system, right? And it even went into the details of like how well they're able to control their heartbeat, going from a very relaxed state, right, to an activated state, like with your heartbeat. And honestly, I'd have to do a whole lot of deep research on that. But for now, what I know is that they do a bunch of sprints, right, plyometrics, actually being able to move the body and go from a relaxed to a max intense state very, very quickly. You probably know Sasaki with the Dodgers. He runs a 6'4", 60. Like, that's no joke, right? Otani, his stealing bases like crazy, right? Even Yamamoto is extremely, extremely quick. And Sasaki and Yamamoto don't even lift. And so a lot of this stuff was trained by being able to move their body extremely well, right? And being able to turn their body on extremely efficiently, okay? And so those are the big three components. Now, I do want to add one more, which is mobility, okay? Mobility is very similar to strength in terms of if you have a good mobility base, right? And if you're mobile enough to accomplish everything that you want to on the mound, then it's not gonna help you that much. But if you're severely limited in your range of motion to where, it's affecting you on the mound, like we had an athlete at the pitch lab actually who had extremely, extremely tight groin, right? Very, very tight. And it was causing all sorts of mechanical issues because he couldn't actually get into those ranges, okay? And so once we were able to actually
free that up, that improved his mechanics and his sequencing, okay? And so I don't have a clear measurement on exactly what is a good mobility base, but we have mechanical specialists at the Pitch Lab who kind of look at it and be like, okay, dude, this is a mobility restriction that we need to free up to be able to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish with our mechanics and our pitching, right? And this is something that I placed a huge importance on when I first embarked on this journey of trying to throw 100 miles an hour, because I had gone through surgery, right? And I couldn't even touch my knees if I had straight legs. That's how tight I was, okay? And obviously that's gonna affect me on the mound. I wouldn't be able to get into certain positions because my lower back, hamstrings, my whole nerve, right? My whole sciatic nerve was extremely tight and sensitive. And so just by opening that up and being able to, touch my toes with ease now, that actually increased my velocity a significant amount. And so again, this is something that you're gonna have to look at, right? It's more of like a bottleneck analysis of like, what is the biggest thing I need to work on now? And let's prioritize that, okay? You can't be working on every single one at once. And that's why you have periodization, where you might have a strength accumulation phase. At the Pitch Lab, this is exactly what we do, is like, okay, if you're a weak guy, you need to build strength base, then okay, we're gonna put you on strength accumulation to build strength. If you're already strong, big, all you need to do is move quicker, then you might do one of these two. If you're extremely tight, we might have to work on mobility with you, okay? And so these are the 4 components that I think about with the frame. And again, your focus should be on one of them. You can't divert your focus and be like, oh, I'm gonna work on each one of these at once. I've seen the best results when you narrow your focus, right? And you're only focusing on one of these 4 at once and really putting your effort in. And then once that has dramatically improved, you can move on to the next. The point of mechanics is basically to be able to produce, to be able to flow all the energy that you create, right? From the ground up into your upper body, into the back of the ball. And so the more energy that's lost, right? The less efficient that we are with transferring all that energy toward the back of the ball, the slower we throw, right? And so if we're gonna throw 98 miles an hour, then we need an extremely efficient delivery, all right? And so obviously there are certain principles that hold in the pitching delivery that'll help you throw harder. And I'll go through all of that in just a second. But this is the key principle. You need to be able to sequence your energy extremely efficiently up the chain to be able to throw hard. And so with mechanics, I think about a couple different principles, starting with the lower body. The first thing I think about with the lower body is linear momentum down the mound, okay? And this can be accomplished by a lot of different ways. Some people accomplish it by drifting aggressively. I wasn't that guy. When I was throwing in the mid-90s, I had a pretty big balance point. And so I would be here, I would load into my back leg, and then I'll create a lot of force going down the mound with my back leg, okay? And so you do need to create a lot of force going toward the target, whether it be the drift or you create it somewhere else. The most ideal way you do it is if you shift your center of mass during leg lift, right? And so it's just free energy at that point. If you're drifting, right, and you're getting your center of mass, which is like, here, away from the plate a little bit, then you're creating momentum toward the target without any type of like muscular activation, right? If you're drifting, it's pretty much just a fall. You're using gravity to your advantage. And so that's step one. The only caveat with the drift is that it can't be like a very distinct move of like, oh, you're gonna drift, then drop and throw. Everything has to be very seamless. Again, going back to the principle of everything has to sequence extremely efficiently. And so that's actually what I'm working on myself right now is, yes, I'm gonna drift, but I'm also trying to get into my load a little bit earlier. Because what I started to run into was I had a really distinct drift and then a drop, okay? Instead of it being a little bit more sequenced, right, and flowing, right? Everything happening seemingly together, okay? And so that's my goal, is everything just flowing. And when you do it really well, then it feels like the ball is just jumping out, right? It's not even like you're putting effort in, it's just like coming out of your hand super easily. And that's the feeling that we're going for. okay? And so that's the first one. The second one is with the back leg. With the back leg, there are a lot of things that need to go right for you to be able to throw, 98 plus miles an hour. And the way I like to think about it is this. I like to think about it more of like an impulse, okay? The back leg isn't just like a dead back leg where you drop into it and then you just rotate like this, all right? I like to think about it more of a impulse, right? An active move where you're here, you're drifting, you're getting your center of mass, but then this is actually stabilizing and actually giving you energy toward the target, right? And what this actually does is when you stabilize, right, then you're actually putting force into the ground. You're pushing into the ground, and then the ground is pushing back up, and then it gives you energy toward the target, right? And so a lot of this, and this is something that I'm going to explain a little bit more in depth, is it has to lead to energy through the target, right? With throwing there, I know it's so simple, and it sounds so simple to throw through the target and have all the energy direct through the target, but we get so caught up in rotating that we actually forget to actually throw through the target and create a lot of energy toward the target and then direct it through the target, okay? And so that's what I think about with the back leg. Now, everyone talks about rotating. Yes, that works for a lot of people. And we actually cue that in the pitcher lab for some guys who don't really rotate very well. For me personally, I like to think about it more of just shifting my weight from my back leg to my front leg. Okay, and so I'm getting that impulse, I'm feeling that. It's gonna catapult me forward, right? And now all I'm thinking about is get to my front leg. Because if I'm able to get to my front leg, then the rotation is happening naturally, right? You don't have to think about rotating, okay? And so again, if you're someone who's not very good at rotating, the pelvis is stuck, closed when you're landing and stuff like that, then yeah, thinking about actually rotating and overcompensating like that can really, really help. But this is just what I was thinking when I was throwing, 98 miles an hour, which was, it's more of a weight shift. Okay, I'm trying to get to my front leg. All right, it's not like a active extension. We don't want to triple extend because that's going to mess us up. I didn't like the just rotate. Okay, it was more of just shifting my weight from my back leg to my front leg. Okay, going from here to there. That's the back leg, and I have a full in-depth video if you want to go watch that on the back leg. But once you create that, right, that's going to create half of the rotation of the hips. Okay, it's going to be open about 45 degrees. The rest is the front leg's job, right? As this extends, it's going to pop open the hips, and then that's what creates the hip to shoulder separation that we all talk about, which is, the separation between your pelvis and your rib cage. This stretch, right? The stretch in your oblique sling. Now, when you create this, all that needs to happen is the upper body shoots forward. Now, with upper body mechanics, the big thing that I think about, and something that I actually didn't do when I was throwing 98, but I wish I would have done this, something I would have done if I started over, right, is the glove side. Now, with the glove side, I like to think about it as a stretch block. And so basically what this happens is as you create separation, right, you're here, and then the glove side creates a deep stretch in the chest area, right? Everything is stretching here. Now, what we don't want to do is continue to pull like this and then throw, because that's going to pull us open, right? What we do want to do is create that stretch, and then the glove side now acts as a block, right? To stop all of this rotational energy and convert it into energy toward the target. Because again, coming back to energy through the target, that's what we need to do, is all the energy going through the target. If we kept rotating, then we'll have a lot of energy going this way, okay? So why I stress throwing through the target is because there was a study, it was a Tom House study that showed that 80% of pitching velocity comes from the separation that we create, right? The other 20% comes from how well we're able to track toward the target. Basically meaning how well we're able to direct energy through the target. And so if we have a lot of energy going this way, then we're losing out on all of that energy that could be directed through the target. And so those are kind of like the biggest things. That was a very, very simplified breakdown, but those are the main points and some of the important points that I think about to throw in the mid 90s and beyond. And I have a bunch of videos that explain each of these in more detail. The hard thing about mechanics, though, is that it's so individualized, right? What works for me might not work for you. What works for you might not work for me. And so that's why it can be very, very difficult. That's why you see in the big leagues, right? No one throws the exact same. Everyone has their own style, has their own quirk. But if you're able to really sequence well, right, and use all of the force that you created, all of the energy, right, and direct it toward the target, well, then you're going to throw hard, right? And that's exactly what we do at the Pitch Lab. We understand that mechanics is king, right? Obviously, we're going to give you a program to really develop what you really need to develop from a training and frame standpoint, but we place so much importance on mechanics because that's what we know is king. And that's honestly the hardest part of all of this, is actually identifying what you need to change mechanically and then actually implementing that to increase pitching velocity, rather than, you know, watching YouTube. Keep watching this is a good video, or Instagram, or, you know, watching something else on social media and then implementing it and thinking that's going to get you to increase velocity. So we have mechanical specialists that all they do pretty much help you with your mechanics, right? Weekly breakdowns. They just, all right, this is what we're going to do for this week. This is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to do. And this is what leads to our guys to gain an average of 3 to 5 miles an hour in the time they train with us, right? And so that's what we do. Obviously, the training and a program, yeah, that's the easy part. But the hard part is actually transferring all of that onto the mound, right? And for you to understand your body, your mechanics, and what kind of athlete you are to be able to maximize how hard you can throw. And that's what's necessary to throw in the mid-90s and beyond. Because truth be told, I mean, only the very, very small percentage would ever throw in the mid-90s, let alone 98 miles an hour. You know, so to give yourself the best chance, you need the information, you need the best guidance to be able to get here. And, you know, once you throw in the upper 90s, every single door opens up. You can go professionally, you can go Division I, you can go wherever you want, because I experienced that as an 18-year-old. As soon as I touched the upper 90s, I got an offer to my dream D1 school. I got an offer to the Philadelphia Phillies, which I eventually signed with, okay? And so that's what we try to do at the Pitch Lab, is help guys get to the mid-90s and beyond. Obviously, if you throw a little bit slow, we're gonna try to get you to, you know, it might be 85, 88, 90. But ultimately, everything that we do, even this video, is to help you achieve your childhood dreams. Everyone watching this, you probably dreamed of playing in the big leagues. And the raw truth is that you need to throw really hard in order to do that. And so that's what we help guys with. And you need help with that, first link in the description. You can book a call with us and we can see if that's the right fit for you.